Chapter 2 in Masechet Tzmachot speaks about someone who commits suicide. It's a very complicated issue, both from a personal. So it's complicated both on the personal level, family level. People have to deal with what happened. Today we know better. We know that some people have suicidal tendencies, and that they have to be watched closely, and they will find a way, one way or another to do it, and it's very unsettling for anyone who either experienced a case like that or knows of a case like that. In halakha, if you ask most Orthodox Jews, they would tell you flat out, someone who committed suicide is not buried regularly, not in the regular section, is not receiving the regular practices of Shiv'ah and Kri'ah, tearing and all that. Right, but now we're aware of the mental.
That's what we do now.
Right. So I'm saying, when you ask most people are not familiar with the details of the law. That's what they know. It's the same thing, by the way, when you ask people about people who have tattoo, right? They say, you don't bury them in a regular cemetery. It's not true. It's never mentioned in halakha. It's something that the Havra Kadisha, probably in medieval Europe or late medieval days, started doing in order to deter people from having tattoos. But there's nothing in halakha that says that this cannot be done. But it's a little different subject. But let's see what the halakha says here. One who commits suicide, you don't do anything for him. And that is a problematic statement in terms of what is it that you don't do. There are a lot of things that we do for someone who passed away, starting with the burial, the purification of the body, burial, the shrouds, and then there is at the burial site, people would stand in line. It's called Omdin Beshura, and either the Avelim would stand in line and everybody would pass by them, or the visitors, the comforters, would stand there and the Avelim would pass through them, and then there's Shiv'ah, tearing the clothes, the Tahara, as I mentioned before. So we'll see later what is it that you don't do. Rabbi Ishmael Omer, Korin alav hoy nitela. You say, Rabbi Ishmael says, you could say a eulogy, woe to the soul that was taken away. Nitla, that was taken away. Amar lo Rabbi Akiva, hanach lo bistamo, al techabedeu ve'al tekaleleu. Rabbi Akiva told Rabbi Ishmael, if you say, woe to the soul that was taken away, it sounds like you're blaming him for taking his own life, so therefore it's better not to say anything. Don't say anything that, when you're trying to honor him, that will end up in disrespect. And then the halakha goes on to say, En kor'in alav, ve'en holtzin alav, ve'lo maspidin alav. One does not tear the garments for him. En holtzim, one does not bare the shoulder. That was another custom of baring the shoulder, lowering the robe to expose the shoulder. That was a sign of mourning. Ve'en maspidim alav, and they don't say, not the eulogy. Laspid was to bring the wailers who would cry and stab their body. Aval omdin alav b'shura ve'omrim alav birkat avelim, but they do stand in line, and they said the bracha. There was a special bracha that the mourners would say, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. I mean, when I say birkat, special bracha was longer at the time. They have a different nusach that we'll see later. And that is because it's the respect of the family. We have to take into account the feeling of the family, and we have to give them respect. So the general rule is that with someone who committed suicide, anything that is done in his honor, we don't do, and anything which is done in the honor of the surviving family, we do. Now, the Shulchan Aruch and Rambam, both, first Maimonides, then the Shulchan Aruch, they all quote the statement of this Masechet Avel Rabbati. It's not written in the Talmud. That's the only source that when we have this discussion, and they all quote it, and they say with these words, you don't do anything, but you do stand in line, etc. So the question was raised: if you do nothing for him, so where do people stand in line to receive the condolences? This is usually done at the cemetery. So the answer to this is that when it is written that nothing is done with him, it doesn't include burial. So everything that has to be done for the burial is done regularly. The tahara, the washing and purification of the body, the shrouds, the burial, and everything. And then they stand in line and receive condolences, but they don't sit shiva at home, they don't do the kriya and all that. And even that is qualified later on when we find a way to consider that was not fully voluntary, but there was some kind of either mental problem or something else that forced that person to commit suicide. We treat him as any regular case of a funeral. So the en mitaskenim b'chol davar. This is the statement that created the problem of, if you take it face value, it means you do nothing for him, even funeral, etc. But when you look at the context of the halacha, you realize that it means those additional things that are done to glorify or to respect the deceased, which include the bearing of the shoulder, the tearing of the clothes, and his bed. So now the question was raised. You asked, did it happen in our history? And Daniel, you brought up Masada. Before Masada, there's in the Tanakh, there are already several famous people who committed suicide. One of them, maybe the most famous, is Shimshon. That is, it's known only in non-Jewish literature. Samson, Shimshon, when he was imprisoned by the Pelishtim, and he was bound to the pillars of the house, so of the temple of Dagon. At the last moment, he says, "Give me strength just this time to take the revenge of one of my eyes of the Philistines." And he pushed the pillars and he brought the house down, and he killed himself with all the hundreds of Philistines that were there. So this is the first case of documented suicide in the Torah. The other famous case is that of Shaul, King Saul, who also in a war with the Philistines felt that he's about to be captured alive, and he said to his page, "Come kill me, because I don't want to fall." This is interesting. Today we have this Hannibal procedure in the Israeli army and other bases and other military protocols that if you cannot save, in certain situations, you cannot save a captured soldier, you will make sure he dies, because he's going to be tortured and give secrets. It's done only in extreme situations. It was done in Gaza during Protective Edge in one case. So Shaul tells his page, says, "Come and kill me, moteteni," because he knows that if the Philistines capture the king, it's not only about him being tortured or disgraced, but also the morale of the people will be devastated. If the king falling in battle is not the same as being captured alive. So his page refused to do it, and Shaul took his sword and fell. He fell on his own sword and killed himself. Later on, at the beginning of Shemuel Bet, we find the Nar Amaleki and a young man of the nation of Amalek, who comes to David to give him the news. He thinks that David will rejoice to hear that Shaul was killed, but instead, David said, "Picha ana becha lemor anochi motatit Mashiach Adonai." You testified against yourself, saying you incriminated yourself, saying that you killed the anointed king. So this man was executed. So those are the two famous cases of suicide, right? Individuals in the Torah, in the Tanakh. There are two others, and it's interesting that between the four of them, they cover all the four methods of capital punishment: skilas, refa, hereg, v'hanek, death by stoning, which is Shimshon brought the house upon himself; death by sword, that's Shaul; then Sheva ben Bichri, who rebelled against the king of Israel and was eventually cornered, was trapped in his own palace. He burnt the house and was burnt with it. So that's serifa. That's the third method of capital punishment. The fourth method of capital punishment mentioned in halacha is henek, strangulation, and the one person who committed that right. So hereg is sword. So that's Shaul. The one who committed suicide by strangling himself was Ahitophel. Ahitophel was the advisor of David, but when Absalom rebelled against his father, Ahitophel gave him. No, that's Absalom.
Oh, that's Absalom.
Right. Yeah. But when Absalom rebelled against his father, Ahitophel betrayed David and went with Absalom. And then he gave him an advice how to defeat his father. He said, you have to gather your army and attack him tonight. That was the first night that David fled to Jerusalem, and Absalom said, Ahitophel told Absalom, you have to attack tonight because your father is still in disarray. He doesn't know where his people are, so attack him right now. His advice was spoiled by another wise man who was a friend of David and stayed behind to serve as a fifth column. So his name was Hushai Arki, and Hushai told Avshalom, don't do it. He says, you know that your father is like a wounded lion and he's probably ambushing you. If you attack tonight, he will win the war. Take your time to gather your army and attack him when you're prepared. And he knew that by doing that, he's letting David buy more time to prepare his people. So that is Hushai, who spoiled the advice of Ahitophel. Ahitophel realized that it's going to be total defeat for Avshalom, and he knew that he's going to be caught in the net because he also betrayed David. So the Navi says, Vaitzav Ahitophel went home, Vaitzav el beto vayihanak. He wrote his will and strangled himself, maybe by hanging or something like that. The rabbis comment on that the reason he did it, there was another reason, and that is he knew that he's going to be executed as a traitor, and the possessions of those who are executed for treason go to the treasury of the kingdom. So the way he did it, he says, at least let my children enjoy my will. So he wrote the will. So those are the four cases in the Tanakh: Shaul, Shimshon, Ahitophel, and Sheva ben Bichri. And later on in our sources, we have the famous case of Masada, the Elazar ben Yair and his warriors who kept fighting from within Masada for almost 3 years. And eventually, when the Romans breached the walls and were able to get in, they found that everybody was dead. The story of what happened there was recorded by two women who fled, who did not want to commit suicide with the rest, and they recorded the whole thing. The interesting thing is that the rabbis and the Talmud and our rabbinic literature, this whole story is never mentioned, not by one word, completely ignored, and not that they didn't know about it. Josephus writes about this. It was well known in Israel at the time, but the rabbis chose to ignore it completely. And I believe that the reason they ignored it is not because the people committed suicide, because at that situation where they had no other choice, they were allowed to do it, but rather because they put themselves into this predicament. Because after the destruction of the temple, Elazar ben Yair and his people chose to get into Masada and fight the Romans, and even when they were fighting them, they didn't only fight from within Masada, they would go down at night to the surrounding fields and set fire to the fields of the Jews who were paying taxes and tributes to the Romans because they wanted to rouse them to start a rebellion. Mm-hmm. So that became for the Romans a focal point. They had to completely crush that rebellion. And the rabbi said that, I believe that was the general ideology of the rabbis at the time. They said, sometimes you have to realize that you were defeated and just lay low until everything goes away. So that's why the story of Masada is not recorded in our rabbinic literature. But there is another story of a mass suicide which is recorded, and maybe it's an exaggeration by the numbers, but the Gemara tells the story of 400 young boys and girls who were captured in Israel and shipped to Rome. So they were on the ship, and they knew that they are going to become slaves and maidservants or even sex slaves. So this called nimkarim liznut in the language of the Gemara. So they said we are going to end up living life of sexual torture and avodah zarah. So they all jumped into the ocean and drowned. And then a heavenly voice came out and said, "Mi amar Hashem, mi bashan ashiv mitzolot yam." I'll bring you back from the deep. So there is a story in the Gemara that glorifies people who commit suicide in that case, and later on we know that it was written into halakha that in situations where one is presented with the option of either transgressing a certain mitzvah or dying, in most cases he should choose life over transgression, over keeping the mitzvot, with the exception of 3 mitzvot, and that is adultery, idolatry, and murder. Even regarding idolatry, there was a debate. Rabbi Ishmael said that for idolatry, one should not die. If someone is being told worship idols, he should worship idols because God knows that this is only superficial, and then find a way to run away or to avoid it. But Rabbi Ishmael was overruled, and everybody voted that for that also, if one is being told to worship idols, he should sacrifice his life. But everybody was in agreement that if one is being told to kill another person or he will be killed, that's a logical, very logical process that determines that you should not do that. Why? Because the language in the Gemara in Aramaic is "May hazit the damad didach sumak tefe." Your blood is not redder than his blood. One life is not worth more than another's life. And the third, adultery is not really adultery. It's incest or sexual violation. It's usually when the man is being told to have a relationship with the woman against her will, that he should sacrifice his life and not do it. That is based on a pasuk in the Torah that equates that kind of act, sexual violation, with murder. This is from Parashat Kitetse, chapter 23 in the book of Devarim. It says about Na'ara Morasa, a woman who was raped, captured and raped, and the Torah says that the violator, the rapist, must be executed. Why? Because this is tantamount to murder. Torah says it clearly. So those are the 3 things that we have in halachic literature. So some individuals in the Tanakh, mass suicide is mentioned in rabbinic sources in order to save one's religious and spiritual integrity, and the halakha mandates that in 3 cases of being obligated to transgress adultery, idolatry, and murder, one does not do that, but rather die. Yes.
Like convert, like in Spain and like in Morocco.
Right. So that is, a sub that comes out of this discussion. A lot of people chose in Spain to convert to Christianity superficially. They are the conversos or maranos, and then they fled Spain. Some of them stayed there. A lot of scholars, both religious and non-religious, even historians, rebuked Spanish Jews. They said they were not strong enough. They should have sacrificed their lives. But when you look at the outcome of history, you realize that they did the right thing because they saved their lives. About 250,000 Jews left Spain. Even after they converted, they stayed for about another 100, 200 years and found ways to leave the country. If they would have all sacrificed their life, everybody would die. What they realized was that it's here you talk about almost a program of mass annihilation. And that's the same thing happened during the Holocaust in the Warsaw ghetto uprising. that there was a group of Hasidic Jews led by Rabbi Menachem Zemba who up to a certain point just kept learning Torah in the ghetto. They said, with the power of Torah, we do whatever we can, and when the Nazis come, they kill us, we die for it to sanctify God's name. Rabbi Zemba, at one point, sent them a letter to all the Orthodox Jews who were left in the ghetto and said, enough with the idea of sanctify God's name. Right now we have to sanctify life, and we have to fight back, because the Nazis are not after us as a religion, they are after us as a race. They're going to, race and religion, they're going to wipe out the Jews completely, and if that happens, who will remain in the world to sanctify God's name? So that is one thing. In Morocco, there was a different story in Morocco and in Yemen, where Jews were forced to convert to Islam. Islam does not fall under the category of avodah zarah, of idolatry.
No.
So one would be allowed to do it, even according to other opinions, and just find ways later on to get out of the situation. Yes, Gary.
Two things. One is, do we say Kaddish or?
Right. So that already brings us to modern time.
Right.
Back when this was written, the Kaddish is not mentioned, because at the time, 7th, 8th century, Kaddish was still not part of the Avelut process. So they don't discuss it. In modern days, we do say Kaddish, because as Avel mentioned earlier, is Avraham, as we now understand that a person does not willingly, I think we could say that most people do not willingly commit suicide. They have to be in an extreme situation to do that. So everybody is forced by some kind of inner or outer motive. So we do say Kaddish for people who commit suicide, yes.
And is Christianity clearly by all sources avodah zarah, or somehow there's a mix?
No, so Christianity is a mixed bag when you come to that. The first ones to say that Christianity is not avodah zarah were the Tosafot in the 12th and 13th century, but they obviously said it because of necessity, because the halakha says that you cannot do business with non-Jews, with pagans, 3 days prior to their holidays and 3 days after their holidays. Now that worked well in Eretz Israel when they lived with Roman paganism. They had 10, 15, or who knows how many holidays a year. And when they had it, they were like 1 week, or so you could take 10 days a break away from business. But when Jews lived with Christians and they celebrate every Sunday, and they considered Sunday to be a holiday, a pagan holiday, then 3 days before, 3 days after is a whole week. And you can never do business with non-Jews, with Christians, so the whole system stops. But so they say it's not paganism, but it's sort of a statement like that. It is for a Jew. If a Jew worships the way Christians do, or believes in the Christian faith, he is considered bordering on paganism, or not following the idea of the unity of God. But for a non-Jew, a Ben Noah, to practice this, it's not considered idolatry. And then when it comes to the question of can you enter a church or that, it's more complicated depending if there are statues, or if the idea of duality by itself makes it avodah zarah. Well, so there is debate among the poskim about that, and also the argument that today's Christians are not as devout and as understanding of their religion as they were in the past, so we could treat it more lightly. But there are many implications to that, and it's a different discussion. But we'll conclude here today. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.